This Notebook LM video explores the long and often violent history of conflicts within Christianity. Religious wars like the Albigensian Crusade, the French Wars of Religion, and the 30 Years' War killed millions. Ironically, some leaders who were once persecuted, such as Martin Luther, later supported violence against heretics, continuing the cycle of intolerance.
Okay, so when you think about religious wars, what probably comes to mind is Christians fighting people of other faiths, right? But what if I told you that some of the absolute bloodiest, longest, and most brutal conflicts in all of history were actually fought by Christians against other Christians? Today, we're diving into that violent and honestly often overlooked history. Just look at this number for a second. 1,454 years. That's how long the period of official, state-sanctioned Christian persecution of other Christians actually lasted. It kicks off way back in 380 AD, when the Roman Empire made one specific type of Christianity the official state religion, and it doesn't technically end until 1834 with the end of the Spanish Inquisition. We're talking nearly 15 centuries of internal warfare. And you know, this wasn't some quiet behind-the-scenes disagreement. This quote right here comes from a 4th century Roman soldier and historian. I mean, think about it. This is a guy who had seen it all. Battlefields, mutinies, you name it. And he was stunned by the sheer ferocity he saw between rival Christian groups, who were literally killing each other in the streets over tiny details of their doctrine. So how on earth did it get so violent so fast? Well, the answer really lies in how the early church started to define itself and its enemies. You see, the tiniest theological disagreements could explode into these massive, violent splits, and it all revolved around one very dangerous idea: heresy. A diphthong. I mean, it sounds almost silly, doesn't it? But the historian Thomas Carlyle was pointing to one of the most significant and violent disputes in the history of the early church, a conflict that, as you're about to see, literally came down to a single letter. And here it is. This is the heart of the whole conflict. The difference between homoousios and homoiousios is one single Greek letter, an iota. That's it, one little I. The question was Jesus of the same divine substance as God, or just a like or similar substance? This single letter difference led to riots in the streets, people being exiled, torture, and murder. It became the dividing line between being a true Christian and being a hated heretic. So, okay, once you can slap that label heretic on someone, you need a way to justify persecuting them. And over time, this really powerful theological framework was built to do exactly that. It turned what was a difference of opinion into a crime that was worthy of death. This distinction, which was laid out by the incredibly influential theologian Thomas Aquinas, it just perfectly captures the medieval mindset. He basically argued that heretics were far, far worse than Jews or Muslims. And his logic? Well, he said outsiders never accepted the faith in the first place, but a heretic was an insider, a traitor who corrupted the truth from within. In his view, this was a crime more serious than counterfeiting money, and it absolutely deserved the ultimate punishment. And of course, these definitions had devastating consequences for real people. Take Balthasar Hubmaier. He was an Anabaptist reformer in the 16th century, and his words here are just heartbreaking. He's basically saying, look, I'm human, I might be wrong about some things, but I'm not a heretic. I'm just trying to learn. But the authorities, they saw him very, very differently. His plea for instruction was totally ignored. Instead, this was his fate. He was tortured on the rack, found guilty of heresy, and then burned alive at the stake. As if that wasn't enough, 3 days later, his wife was drowned in the Danube River. This was the brutal, lethal reality of being on the wrong side of the official doctrine. And what happened to Hubmaier? Well, it wasn't some isolated incident. It was more like a preview. These theological disputes, now supercharged by politics and a lust for power, just exploded into full-blown wars that drenched the entire European continent in blood for centuries. And we're not talking about small skirmishes here. The Albigensian Crusade against the Cathars might have killed as many as 1 million people. The French Wars of Religion pitted Catholics against Protestants for decades of brutal warfare. I mean, from Ireland to Central Europe, entire generations knew nothing but war waged in the name of Christ against other followers of Christ. 8 million. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's the estimated death toll for just one of those conflicts, the 30 Years' War. It was one of the most destructive wars in all of human history, and it was fought almost entirely between Protestant and Catholic states. And here's the real kicker, the ultimate irony in all this. Even the leaders of the Reformation, the guys who were themselves declared heretics by the Catholic Church, they ended up calling for the exact same kind of violence. Martin Luther, at first, he argued that killing heretics was wrong, but years later, he did a complete 180, insisting that rulers had a duty to use the sword to wipe out any false teaching. So you might be thinking, okay, the great wars of religion, they're over. And you're right, but that us versus them mentality, that deep instinct to label fellow Christians as the enemy, that hasn't disappeared, not at all. It's just changed its form, and you can see echoes of it all the way to the present day. In fact, this same dynamic has played out right in American history. In the 19th century, there was massive hostility from Protestants towards Catholic immigrants. In the 20th century, you had groups like the KKK using Christian symbols to justify their hatred of Catholics. And even today, in our own century, you have these intense debates around what some critics call Christian nationalism, an ideology they argue can create intolerance, not just for outsiders, but for other Christians who don't happen to share its very specific political and theological views. So all of this history, it brings us back to this one profound question. It was posed by a writer in the 16th century named Sebastian Castellio, a man who saw this brutality with his own eyes. And he asked, who gets to decide? Who has the authority to draw that line between truth and heresy, especially when that line is so often drawn in blood? It's a question that, after 1,500 years of conflict, kind of still just hangs in the air.